Garden failures. It's safe to say that this year was the year of garden failures for me, or failure, because my entire veg patch has been devastated by weather and snails. Basically snails, to be completely honest. The weather helped, but it was mostly snails that did the damage. And I think that this is something that defines the real gardener from the ones that are following the fads and stuff like that, the trendy gardeners, so to say, is that we don't get discouraged when we get failures in the garden. The failures are core of gardening. You will always fail in something, so it's the way that it is. It grows your character and teaches you resilience. The fact that your garden has failed and you still try to grow same stuff, like me with onions. But that's because the first 2 years when I grew onions, they were so abundant and so beautiful, and we ate our onions from, I don't know, August, September up until the April of next year. So the entire hungry gap was covered by the onions from that we planted. And then when the mole came and the snails now learned to eat onions, it's not been so good. This year I only have 3 plants that succeeded. One was Rocket that I've planted into the garden, and this is a type of wild variety, so it is perennial type, and it was really beautiful this year. The snails and slugs won't touch it, so I was able to eat it for a long time, especially because summer was quite cold, which made some other issues in the garden and really allowed the slugs and snail to flourish this year. But they left it, so at least something was left. We also managed to eat our potatoes, even though at one point snails have just stripped all of the leaves from the potato plants. So one day I came into the garden and was admiring my beautiful potato plants that were big, that were wonderful, that were healthy. And then after a week of rain, I came back to the garden and all that was left was sticks. And one plant had several small leaves with the snail that was finishing them off. So it was just devastating. They did manage to bounce back, but I never knew when they were ready for harvesting because they never flowered. They were the early variety and they were supposed to be done or harvestable at the latest middle of July, but I actually left them until after middle of September because for 2 weeks they didn't have any leaves. A couple of them died. The ones that they have survived the leaf annihilation, those ones have come back and they managed to give us the potatoes. They were delicious, but there weren't a lot of big potatoes. They were quite small. And I think that's the reason behind that is the snail damage that was done on them. The last plant that was successful in the veg patch were tomatoes, and those were successful only because I have bought the potato plants in the garden center that were this big already. Because every plant that I have transplanted into the garden that I have grown from the seeds, that was much smaller than a foot high, they just eliminated it eliminated it all the way to the ground. You just never knew that you have planted anything. With plant tomatoes one day and then the next day you come into the garden and there's none left. Literally none. One thing that wasn't destroyed by the snails and slugs were zucchinis. I tried planting at least the flying saucer zucchinis, the patichons, and they just failed. I tried sowing them directly into the container, they would start growing and die. I tried sowing them back home in the soil and then growing them up until they have like first 3-4 real leaves and then transplanting them, and for some reason they just didn't want to grow. I don't know why. I was putting quality soil inside the containers, but I have no idea why they didn't want to live. It could be my neighbor's cat that was using that container for its toilet, but still, I planted them in the corners and the cat didn't use the corners for toilet. Yeah, so that's when it comes to the veggies that have absolutely failed this year. When it comes to the fruit, we have abundance of plums this year. We were quite surprised by the amount of plums that we have. It was wonderful, and I made us again a lot of marmalade. We had an abundance of pears as well. So I made some pear jam. Well, something between the jam and the pie or cake filling. I used that in both cases as jam and as a filling. And the last thing that I did make was the blackberry marmalade. However, blackberries can be considered to be a failure because they were just too sour. At the same time, when they were supposed to be ripe and harvestable, there was a week of bad weather, so rain, and some more rain and cold, and we just didn't have any blackberries that we could eat fresh and that we could freeze. They were all so tart. The one week that they did manage to get to ripen correctly and to get sweet, it was already end of the season and there were not a lot of blackberries on the plants that were left, but at least I managed to save the blackberry harvest by harvesting them and then turning them into jam. Albeit this could also be considered a failure because we do like to eat the blackberries while, fresh blackberries, they're delicious. So all in all, if you ask me, this year has been failure. Have I learned something from it? No, because I'm again planting onions. So it seems to me the first 2 years when we have planted onions, they were completely fine, and for some reason the slugs and snails have left them alone. And then this year, the slugs and snails during the wet weeks gotten into the container with onions and just devastated them. So the biggest onion that I have harvested this year was this big. And I'm not kidding. Everything else was super small. And instead of us eating the onions the entire year, entire winter, we just ate them like in 2 weeks. Because there was just nothing to eat. It wasn't even... They weren't usable. So... I don't use pesticides, I don't use herbicides, I don't use fungicides, any type of sites I don't use. So there is nothing that would kind of protect my plants from the pests and disease except my own, how to say, shepherding. Me taking care of them and watering them and planting resilient plants and stuff like that. But this means that I have to be prepared to have more failures than someone who is going to use all of the chemicals is going to have in their garden. So if you are growing the veg like I am, which is completely organic or natural even, because when it comes to organic growing, you still have some sort of chemicals that you can use in order for your harvest to still be called organic. I'm a bit of extreme because I do not like to use chemicals, and I don't use chemicals for my garden at all. This does mean that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of failures. It's sometimes really difficult to have any type of harvest, but I would rather go this way and then make sure that when I eat the fruit that it's healthy, that there's no poisons on it, because I'm allergic to a lot of stuff, to a lot of pesticides and remnants of the pesticides that are on the plants, and preservatives, and I don't know what. I just, I cannot eat those. So for me, it's much better to take the risk and have a bit more failures in the garden by not using chemicals than to insist of having perfect plants, even when that means that I have to just douse them in the chemicals. But yeah, like I said, it builds resilience. If you have failures in the garden and then just try and try again, it builds resilience. There is a point though when you have to quit planting the plants that you like and say, okay, I'm not going to plant this anymore because it's not worth it. And that's when you have years when this type of crop constantly fails. Not necessarily because of the snails and the pests like that, but because they just don't like the weather. If you have failures due to the climate, overall climate, not just the freak year, but overall climate of the area, then it might be time to switch to another variety or to stop growing the plant altogether. Yeah, and I hope that next year I will have less failures and I will finally have some onions. Stupid sucker.